Growing up, I always enjoyed piano music. I was maybe 13 or 14. I didn't have many friends, to be honest, since we moved to a small town. The music always seemed to fill the empty bedroom. We didn't have any money to spare for classes, let alone much food. My uncle and my dad brought me a little piano, after figuring that I was maybe interested in learning, after listening to the classical music through my door. The one they gave to me was one of the electronic ones. It was small, and the keys were white while the body of it was a pretty pink colour. I tried to teach myself a few songs every now and then. At times when I was bored of the continual learning, I would simply play random notes that sounded well together. My uncle and my dad enjoyed listening to the music, and at times their eyes were a bit emotional. I didn't understand why, but whenever I would play, I would catch them standing by the door listening. I thought at the time that they just liked the piano and watching me learn. I didn't know the real reason at the time. One time, as I was leaving my bedroom after playing some notes that I thought sounded pretty, I walked out of my bedroom to take a break and to hang out with my family upstairs in the living room. I noticed that my uncle was standing by the door. He smiled warmly and said, "My mum used to play that song." I said, "Your mum played the piano?" He said yes, and that she was very good. She used to play the organ as well. Their parents died when they were kids in a tragic car accident, which separated them into different foster homes across the country, later to come back together as young adults. Their parents loved them very much. I didn't know the song, and after that, I didn't know what song it must have been. But at times, when we would pass a piano in a thrift store, I would somehow briefly play those keys again, and my dad would listen. Those keys would only play when my dad or his brothers were nearby. It was probably just luck, but the look in their eyes, I won't forget the beautiful love of a son for his mother. They also say that I look just like her. When I was growing up, there had been a few forests around town that had famous stories linked to them. The people believed that the forests were cursed from the Native American tribes, who were relocated from their homes way back when. They said the forests belonged to them, and when you go in and past your gut feeling, those people die in those woods. When my dad and my sister and I moved when I was around 13 or so, we moved to a small town. Across the street was a hill, and at the top stood a blue water tower. I used to hang out in the woods across the street from my house. It was quiet, and the birds always chirped. Other kids were scared of the woods, but I went up there to draw and listen to the birds. Also, because it was at the top of a hill, I could look out and see the entire town and feel the breeze. But when the animals went quiet, it was time to go. When the school year started, I found out it was an ancient Indian burial ground. Every year, our class would go up the hill and learn about it and the town, and the school was actually really respectful of the forest and the hill. We took care of the trees there. If you looked at the ground, you could still see a lot of Native American arrowheads. We never took them home though, or were not supposed to. I didn't at least. I actually would go into the forest when I was walking home because the bullies were too scared to go in. I felt safe there, but I also had to remember to respect it. In the forest, we also had wood piles. When we would go into the forest, we would make piles for the local foxes to nest in the wintertime. One time, when I went to school after retreating into the forest from one of my bullies the other day, a couple of my classmates came up to me and said, What did you do to Jacob?" I looked at the kid and said, "Nothing, why?" They looked at each other and said, "Well, something scared him, and we thought you scared him in the woods." I said, "I didn't scare him. I just went to hang out up there is all." That time, Jacob threw a rock at me, and I remember it landed to my right, and I hurried up my pace in the woods, and I thought he left the woods at that point like he always did. He screamed "raccoon" at me, and when I reached the top of the hill, I cried and went home because for some reason that time, the bullying hurt. Whatever happened to Jacob in the woods, I'll never know. He stopped bullying me from that day and said sorry to me and that it will never happen again. He did say something happened in the woods, but he never said by what or who. but he had a look of terror and practically begged me to say that he was sorry. I told him it was okay, and I went on my way. He could never look at me in the eye again. That was back in middle school. When I went to college, I saw him at a 4th of July college event. I was going to catch up with him about life and put the bullying behind us. He glanced, but he still looked uneasy, so I simply walked by. Also, sometimes, my sister would walk home with me after school. Only once or twice, I recall. Every time we entered the woods, she felt lost. I even had her lead us and she couldn't follow the trail. It's like she kept seeing these invisible trails that went in circles. She started to breathe heavily and cry and said we were lost. And she had an anxiety attack and just told me she had to get out of the woods. I was totally chill and knew the forest pretty well, then led us out and it was easy. It was literally just 3 trails, one from the south, one from the north, and one going up the hill to our house. You could get in and out of the forest in under 10 minutes, from one side to the other. As I lay with my face facing the wall, my dad checked on me by just opening the door and leaving after seeing me in bed. I was wanting to fall asleep, so I just lay still and didn't see him or anything behind me. After about 2 minutes after the door closed, I felt the bed pressure shift, like someone was sitting down on it and was crawling towards me. The bed I'm on is made of 2 regular beds pushed side by side, quite spacious. I was thinking maybe my dad was wanting to just mess around with me, because he has done stuff like that before. However, the room atmosphere was really weird, the kind that gives you chills. I kind of got frozen but awake. Perhaps I was just afraid to move, but it felt as if I couldn't move a muscle and continued to stare at the wall. I eventually got the willpower to turn around, about 4 minutes of staying still, and to my shock, I was the only one in the room. I eventually just went to sleep, but with my back to the wall instead, because I was pretty tired to deal with stuff like this. However, sometimes I think I hear people call me by my name from a distance at random places. My name isn't that common in the country I stay in, and I do sometimes feel a random strange atmosphere change in places. Wondered if anyone else gets these too. My memories of these events are fading, and I only remember a few key details. I was born in 1979, and shortly after my parents built a new house in the suburbs in Milwaukee for them, my older brother by 2 years, and me. One night I was in bed, about 4 or 5 years old, reading a book on the alphabet. I was lying down with my legs bent so I could support the book and read it using my flashlight. I was on the letter Q when I felt something in the room. I dropped my legs down and saw something at the edge of my bed. It looked like a shadow. It said Q, and it scared me, so I dove under the covers. A few days later, I woke up and saw it again, but this time, it was with something else. It looked like a small person covered in seaweed, to which I asked, assuming it was my brother for some reason, "Where did you find the seaweed, Matt?" I think they both looked at me, and I did the whole thing under the covers again. The last major thing happened some other night. I felt something grab my feet and try pulling me out of my bed. I grabbed onto the headboard and held it until it stopped. I never told my parents what happened. I think I saw shadow figures around the house, but I'm not sure if those are real memories or not. But I thought I saw something going in and out of my closet during this time. My wife and I were living in an apartment, and my great aunt was looking to sell her home. The house was built in the 50s and needed some work, and my aunt didn't feel like taking care of it. So she suggested she take the apartment and we buy the house. It was 2005 and the market was going nuts, so it worked out for everyone. We got a fixer-upper for a fair price, and she got an apartment without the hassle. The house was always full of people. We had friends live with us for a while, then my brother, then we had kids. And when we first moved, we had 2 cats. Not long after the move, our younger cat got very, very ornery. He was constantly hissing, refusing to use the litter box, scratching at everyone. That was not him though. In the apartment, he would cuddle on the back of my neck while I watched TV and purred constantly. I didn't even know he could hiss until we moved. So after ruining our second load of laundry by urinating in it, we decided maybe he just needed to stretch his legs and explore outside. The very first night we let him out, he failed to come back in. We shook treats, put out food, nothing. By 10 p.m, I went out to look for him. My heart broke when I found him just outside the window of a spare room. No signs of trauma, just dead. I sadly buried the cat by an old tree, feeling totally guilty that I didn't do more for him. I feel even worse now after reading the aforementioned paranormal post. After the cat passed, I started sleepwalking, actually opened up the basement door and fell down a flight of stairs. That sucked. Tried walking out of the house in the middle of a New England winter and was luckily stopped by my wife. Every once in a while, I'd get creeped out or hear strange sounds, but it was nothing really noteworthy and could be explained as someone else making noise. My wife would hear voices. My son, who was 2 or 3 at the time and has 2 older siblings, started waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning crying. It should be noted that his bedroom was the old spare, the one with the window I found my cat under. Our other cat would go into his room and stare at the top corner of his wall. The dogs would growl outside the door but not enter. All pretty explainable. My wife was getting nervous, but I just laughed it off. We live close to our neighbours. My sons are hitting a developmental milestone. Maybe squirrels are getting into the attic. My great aunt passed away a few years after we owned the house, and shortly after, our first cat got very ill. He started peeing everywhere, just like our second, and later died of CHF. That's when things went from weird to scary. We were watching my brother's son one day. I hear giggling in my son's room. It's my nephew. I walk in and he's pointing at the corner the cat used to stare. Just creepy giggling. My son started saying things like, "I don't want to go to bed, he gets mad," or "the shadow went over there." I still laughed it off out loud, but was getting creeped out. That uneasy, someone's here feeling kept hitting harder and harder. Then the 3 a.m. stuff. Super cliche, but hand to God, I had never heard of the witching hour until I started talking to guys at work. That's how creeped I was getting. I told people about this craziness. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. No big deal. Though falling back to sleep was tough because I felt like someone was watching. Then, for absolutely no reason at 3:01, my smoke detector starts going off. Fire, fire, fire. Goes off 3 times and stops. Check the house, nothing. Change the batteries and go back to bed. The next morning, 3:01, fire, fire, fire. Goes off 3 times, then stops. I get up again, nothing. After the 4th night, I'm totally spooked. Then, inexplicably, it stops. We ended up moving shortly after. It was our dream to move north, and plans were in motion before things got too wild. But the timing really worked for us. We moved into an 1850s farmhouse. I've never felt safer. No creepy feelings, the kids are sleeping better. I've even stopped sleepwalking. As a side note, the people who bought our house never even moved in. They put the house back on the market, where it sat for almost a year. Creepy. I used to work at a Pier 1 import several years ago as a sales associate. One afternoon, on a very slow day when there were no other customers, I noticed a blonde-haired boy, maybe about 8 years old, looking at a small table all by himself. I asked if he needed any help, and he had this look on his face, like he was smirking at me, and he seemed to act very mature for his age. I asked if he was interested in the table for his parents, and he said, sure. Then asked me to find the price for him, so I had to turn my back and walk away to look it up. Next thing I know, he's gone. And I never heard the entrance door bell chime. I asked my co-worker and manager if they had seen him, and both had no idea who I was referring to, and said that there had been no other customers in the building. Fast forward to the same night, I noticed the doodle of a stick-figured little boy drawn on one of the back shelves. Fast forward a few months later, I was sweeping at the end of my shift, and in the dustpan, I noticed a small, crafted paper doll of a little boy, and just looked like the doodle on the shelf. It wasn't smiling. In between these times, other incidents happened. I was sweeping near the back shelves one shift, and one of the glass lanterns I was a few feet from just spontaneously exploded and shattered everywhere. Everyone was weirded out about it and had no explanation. Another night, I was helping a customer carry in a lamp to the register, and one of its glass bulbs on the post also spontaneously exploded and shattered everywhere, scaring the crap out of us. Again, no one had an explanation. Nothing major, but weird, right? I guess. The entire decade we've been living in this house, my family has experienced disembodied voices. This wasn't something new to my family, as our previous house was very old and haunted, and we heard children's voices on occasion. I remember one day, after middle school, I had a friend over to visit. Once we were halfway to my room, which was in the middle of the long, unfinished basement, we began laughing together at either a joke or something that happened earlier that day in class. While mid-laugh, a small voice of a child emanated from an old rocking horse, which was off to the side and against a wall. He sounded younger than us, maybe 6 to 8 years if I'm remembering right. He was laughing with us as if he was there the entire time, but he wasn't there at all, physically. Me and my friend both looked at each other and ran out of my house with the front doors wide open. Stuff happened to me before, and I heard family stories, but that was the exact moment I learned it's all completely fucking real. Friends have called me bad luck and had refused sleepovers in the following years. Things always seem to happen when I'm around that just creep everyone out, such as small dusty handprints appearing on a friend's car while we were hanging out. To get to the point, things have calmed down now. I'm currently in my 20s and still living with my family. All of us on occasion will hear the other calling them from another room. We're no longer hearing voices of others, but voices that mimic loved ones identically. Is there anyone else here who can relate to these experiences? Does anyone know what I'm currently dealing with? As I don't feel it's necessarily dangerous, but I'm going out on a limb and saying it's probably not human either. I live in a rural part of Canada, and my city has been built over native burial grounds, which are still being dug up during construction. I've always wondered, could it be a skinwalker that may have followed me after an encounter with friends on a native reservation? Any input is much obliged. My father and his ex-wife had purchased land and built a house on the outskirts of my town that was predominantly a farming community. There were 8 kids, plus the parents and my uncle and his 2 kids living in the home during the time of the haunting. My younger sister, we'll call her Rena, was about 13 at the time and was budding into a hardcore punk goddess. She and her friends had become obsessed with seances and were doing them regularly at each other's respective houses for fun during sleepovers. One night, Rena encouraged 5 of the siblings, including one of my cousins, to perform a seance in the basement of our newly built home with her. Myself and the youngest 2 of the kids/cousins weren't present. From what I have been told, Rena was trying to contact River Phoenix. She was obsessed with the film Stand By Me at the time, and was getting frustrated with the lack of response in front of the other kids. Rena explained something to the effect of, well, since the spirits are going to be pussies, we're going to end it, and blew out the candle they had set up in the middle of their hand-holding circle. Most of the siblings present for the seance recall an eerie, almost pressure descended on the room when the candle went out. But that was about it. Even though I wasn't present for the seance, that's when the sightings began for me. I believe it was a week or so later when I woke up in the middle of the night. For context, all the kids were two to a room. Rena and I slept in the framed-out basement with blankets for walls, so we could hear everything in the basement from our room. All the other kids had fully furnished rooms upstairs, where the two cousins also slept. My uncle slept in the other blanket room adjacent to ours. When I woke up that night, a shadow-like figure darted in front of me and crouched down about 3 feet away from me and just stared. In my half-awake state, I said, "Rena, what are you doing?" Because I thought the figure was my sister, who had gotten up in the middle of the night and was trying to pull some odd prank on me. The figure said nothing, but reacted to my voice by tilting its head to one side, still staring at me. I put staring in quotes because I couldn't actually make out any features, but the moonlight from the window well cast enough lit to fully outline the character, who was obviously facing my direction. More awake now, I said louder, "Rena, what are you doing?" The figure tilted its head again the opposite way, and then vanished in a mist-like fashion. At that point, I thought I was just exhausted, and that what I had seen was just a dream, and turned over to go back to sleep. The second time I saw the ghost was another couple weeks later. By this time, atypical things of haunting had started occurring in the home. Lights going on and off, doors opening and shutting, the TV turning on to white noise in the middle of the night. But the whole family hadn't caught on to something happening, and each encounter was caught by someone else. So all 13 of us thought nothing of each small instance, as it wasn't equaling a whole quite yet. For me though, the second night I randomly woke up, I was sleeping on my back. I awoke suddenly to a shadow figure leaning over me, as if they were straddling me, but there was no pressure on my bed to indicate anyone was actually there. It was like the figure was floating above me. The figure abruptly brought their hands above their head and moved as if to strike down on me with a hammer punch with both fists. I swiftly moved my arms up above my head to block the blow, but by the time my arms reached overhead, the figure was gone. It was as if my arms had wiped it away as they moved past my face. I lay there stunned for a moment, but ultimately decided that it was another dream and fell back asleep. Another couple weeks passed when the ghost woke me up again. I shot straight up in bed from a side sleeping position and turned immediately to the window well. The figure was leaning into the well from up above and was just looking at me. I stared back for what felt like a few minutes, but had to leave in less than 20 seconds, while the figure did that familiar head tilt back and forth as it examined me. It misted away in the same fashion as the first encounter, and I just fell back into bed asleep. This was the only time I had seen the outline of the hat that would become important to my other family members' experiences. So up to this point, I hadn't told anyone of what was going on. I thought I was dreaming each time these occurred, and didn't think much of the sightings. But a few days after this last encounter, my dad expressed some disconcertion with the other kids. He stated that a few of them were seeing things in the house, and that they were afraid of the dark and the basement because that's where the dark men lived. I still don't know why, but I was supremely unconcerned with what was going on and just nonchalantly stated, "Oh yeah, I've seen him." My dad gave me a shocked look and asked when. I recounted my previous sightings to him and expressed that I had only thought they were dreams at the time. At this, his shock only increased. For further context, my father believes in ghosts, as do much of the family, including myself. We all love watching those shows about ghost hauntings and are regular visits to some of the haunted areas of our town. But my father expressed that he didn't believe a word of the other kids, since they were much younger and very influential. But since I, the oldest, maybe around 14 or 15, had seen it and hadn't said anything, he felt very compelled to believe everyone now. Once the whole family had agreed something was going on in the house, it's like the entity took the haunting up a notch. Things started to get pretty aggressive, especially to the youngest siblings. Once the family all realised something was going on, the hauntings got more regular and ultimately got more aggressive. I believe all of this had to do with the attention we were all giving the experiences now. In fact, all the kids started messing with the ghost, and my sister Rena led a couple more seances to try and figure out who the entity was. I guess during one of the seances, one of my little brothers felt someone blow on his ear at the same time the candle blew out on its own. Everyone screamed and ran upstairs. The siblings even came up with a game called The Dark Man, and would take turns sitting in the blanket room that was my uncle's in the basement and goad the entity with taunts of Dark Man. One of my youngest brothers was sitting in there when he saw a figure materialise in the hallway. The figure was shadowed and had what looked like a wide brim hat on. The figure slowly started walking the length of the hallway to the blanket draped over the doorway. He said he started screaming, and the other kids came rushing down the stairs, and the figure vanished before the doorway as they came around the corner. I myself would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and would listen to the sounds of footsteps walking up and down the basement stairs without fear. At this point, we were all individually startled, but as a group, not very scared. We all believed in spirits, and honestly, at the time, it was kind of cool. When the basement door would open and shut on its own while we were watching TV in the living room, we would stop and stare at each other excitedly to see if something else would happen. But then, the entity started messing with the younger siblings. We never really spoke of the Dark Man to the youngest to prevent them from being scared. But evidently, they were seeing the Dark Man anyways. The two youngest were 1.5 and 6. We'll call them May and Carrie. May and Carrie shared one of the finished rooms upstairs. Carrie, 6, was terrified of the Dark Man. Apparently, she had seen him multiple times in her closet just staring at her. She would always scream and cry and end up sleeping with the parents because of her fear. She was the only one of us who could describe at length what the entity looked like. One night, Carrie was just fixated on her closet. She said she knew the Dark Man was in there and was waiting for him to peek out at her. She stared in horror as the Dark Man looked out at her but wasn't a shadow. She described him as a dirty white farmer with overalls and a wicker hat that leaned out of the closet, looked at her, left the closet, and walked into the hallway. Walked back from the hallway, staring at her as he re-entered the closet and vanished. My dad's ex-wife later described this as a shriek of absolute terror as she ran to comfort Carrie. After Carrie's incident, my dad's ex-wife became increasingly on edge about what was going on in the house, especially the long-term effects it would have on the two youngest. But my dad was too enthralled about the haunting and told her not to worry about it. She explained to him that she'd woken up to the TV in their room being onto white noise and the figure standing above her. She said she felt like it wasn't a good presence and that we needed to get it out. My dad, up until this point, hadn't heard too many first-hand experiences. He shared the same incident with the TV being on to the white noise when the remote was across the room, but didn't think it warranted an intervention, but merely to just ignore the goings-on. Then, the entity really started in May. During all the time the rest of the kids were joking and messing with the ghost, and Carrie being terrified at it, May was starting to see things, odd things, and woke up screaming in the night. May was only 1.5 years old and didn't have enough vocabulary to say much. She knew the word doggy really well, as it was her first word. She would point and exclaim, "Doggy," at pretty much anything. One night, Rena and her friend were babysitting/sleeping over at the house. I don't remember why, but me and a few of the siblings, including Carrie and the parents, weren't home for this one. When they heard May let out a blood-curdling scream, they ran upstairs and she was standing in her crib, facing the corner of the room, repeatedly screaming, "Doggy, doggy!" Every time May looked over her shoulder at the closet, the same closet as Carrie's, she would whip her head away, resuming the shriek, "Doggy!" May was inconsolable in their room. Serena and her friend brought her downstairs to sleep on the couch while they resumed watching TV, absolutely shook up themselves. A few days later, I heard May upstairs screaming, "Doggy," but I knew my dad was up there and that he was taking care of it. Then my dad started to yell for me to get May's blanket and nug to him. I located the items and tried to offer it to May when I arrived at the room. She wouldn't take them, but kept looking behind my father and I, pointing to the corner of the room, shouting, "Doggy!" Both my dad and I looked behind us to nothing there, but May insistently pointed to the empty corner, screaming, "Doggy!" We had to remove her from the room in order to calm her down. This last incident with May finally tipped my dad to figure out a way to get rid of the entity. My dad did some research into how to exorcise a ghost, as he was now scared for how the ghost was beginning to terrorize the family, especially the youngest two. He looked up some methods that day after May's encounter and settled on one he felt comfortable with. When he went to bed that night, my father woke up in the dark man standing above him, and he shot out of bed with a gasp. This awoke my dad's ex, and she said, "You finally saw him, didn't you?" He said yes, and they made a plan for her to take everyone from the house so we could get rid of the host alone. When we all left for the next day, some finally outing with Dad, he began his ritual. He later explained to me how he went into every room and dictated loudly and firmly that the presence was not allowed in the threshold and that it needed to leave the house, that it was no longer welcome. He did this in every room multiple times, and even the garage and outer perimeter of the home. After the family outing, I saw no more of the dark man or heard his footsteps, or had odd experiences throughout the home. May and Carrie no longer woke up screaming, and everything seemed back to normal. At first I didn't realize it because I was so used to the happenings and the kids were still going through the motions of messing with the ghost. It took a few weeks to realize I hadn't had anything odd happen. In fact, it took my father bringing it to my attention that nothing had happened to me to realize it stopped. See, my dad hadn't told any of us what he did that day. He waited a few weeks to make sure it worked before expressing to us that he had got rid of us the ghost. A few of my siblings maintained that the dark man was still there, and they continued to play the dark man game for some time after. But we all eventually accepted he was gone. All of us love to share these stories to this day, and the only one who arguably had the most traumatizing experience can't remember any of it because she was so young. But May loves to hear about them, so we recount our sides, including what happened to her. My grandfather lived in a very rural area in Nepal, and most of the people were farmers. So was he. Since there was no automated water system, they would have to take turns to switch water to their land, sometimes at night time. One night, there was a full moon, and even though it was midnight, everything was visible with naked eyes. As usual, he went to the farm to switch the water flow from one section to another. Everything went as normal. He sat down for a quick smoke session. He saw a small baby goat near the farm, which was very strange because there were no houses anywhere near, and it's not normal for goats to roam around by themselves. He thought he'll take it to the village, and whoever it belongs to can claim it tomorrow. He has the goat on his back, and his hands are grabbing onto its legs. He was walking up the hill when suddenly he heard a whisper, "Such a pretty moon, making the night so beautiful." The goat talked like a human being. He threw the goat to the ground and started running up. He looked back as he was crossing the hill, and there's no goat. He ran all the way home, and he told us he smoked the whole packet of cigarettes and didn't sleep at all that night. I can't remember the ones that my grandfather told me, but I know some from my cousins. There's a wood in between two towns close to where I lived, and we hear all these stories. Nepal is a developing country, and the roads aren't very good. Forget the streetlights. And there's basically no lights in the woods, even though it's one of the biggest highways. My cousin and his friends were riding motorbikes to go camping out of town, and they had to pass through the woods. They were aware of what goes on in that road. Usually someone asks for help with a broken bike or a motorbike, and when someone comes to help, the person asking for help disappears, and the broken bike starts riding itself. So they told each other to stay close and not stop, no matter what. They were riding in 3 motorbikes with 2 on each, 6 people in total. They didn't see anyone asking for a broken bike or anything, but one of the guys started riding his bike towards the trees, out of the road. The others shouted at him to stop, but he didn't until he crashed into a tree, lucky not to cause too much harm. The others asked him what the fuck he was doing, and he told them he was driving normally. Even the guy sitting at the back said they were on the road, until they crashed into a tree out of nowhere. They figured it was probably the ghost causing them to see multiple roads or something, and they returned home, but didn't want to risk and proceeded another 20 minutes in the woods until they got to another town. I've also heard stories from other people in the same place where they see a pretty girl asking for a lift, and when you stop for her, it looks like she's coming, but then there's nobody. Pretty safe to say, the place is haunted. I personally don't want to mess around and text it out, but that place freaks me out, even during daytime. Just a double-lane road in the middle of woods. So myself and a friend had something happen the other day. Left another friend's house about 4 AM. It's dark. Streetlights have just come back on. They get turned off at 1 AM every day, back on at 4 AM every day to save money. And it's a clear night, with a couple clouds in the sky. Looks nice with the moon and all. Anyways, my friend and I are walking for just 2 minutes round the corner of the road. It's a dead-end road, one way in, one way out, and goes downhill. And in front of us, about 50 meters away, are 5 people. 2 children. What looks like the parents and an elderly woman. It's a bit odd. A family out at 4 AM, stood under a streetlight. Not impossible to happen. People are unpredictable. As we got closer, they look really odd now. White shirts, beige trousers and dresses, exactly the same colours. Again, not impossible, just odd. Getting closer, across the road from them now, and you can see how daunting they look. Black rings around their eyes. They don't look healthy. Sunken faces, etc. Quite creepy now, but even creepier when they just stare, eyes following the whole way. My friend, who's female, is clearly terrified as something really isn't sitting well with them. So we walk on a bit faster. I grab her closer to me just in case anything happens. I'd rather she get away safe. So we carry on for literally seconds before a stone flies by and hits the pavement in front of us. Made us jump. My friend was even more scared now. I got annoyed, so I turned to confront them, and they were gone. They were there mere seconds before, and now completely gone from where they were. There was nowhere to hide so fast, no other ways out of that road. They'd have to run past us to get away. Now we're running down the road away from where they were, friends crying. I'm getting tense. I hate dark, and honestly, I was fucking scared too. So I tell her to hold on to me and stay close, and moved to a walk as we got further down the road. The road itself takes about 10 minutes to walk down. We're probably 6 minutes in, but looking behind us constantly. We get to the end of the road, turn around again, nothing, but the lights are turned off, only for about 20 seconds. Now we are submerged in darkness by what we can see at the end of the road by a bus stop. And at that bus stop we see 5 people, 2 children, their parents, and the elderly woman, just standing there staring. We have nowhere else to go now. I've called my friends to see if they're awake, but their phones are dead, so I can't contact anyone. I still have their faces and clothing all imprisoned in my mind. This is Christmas morning. It's 4 a.m. Christmas Day. My friend doesn't understand what happened, and I for sure don't. We've tried to talk to friends about it, but they think the darkness tricked our minds. It's something I can't stop thinking about, and I dream about it. More nightmares, can barely sleep since. Once, I was sleeping on a normal night, when suddenly I felt a strong punch in my jaw at the left side. When I woke up, I looked to the side, searching who the hell punched me with my face, like, what the fuck happened here now? I looked to the door of my bedroom in front of my bed, and I noticed it was open, and I lifted off my bed and went to it to see something. When I saw the other side of the door, I noticed that the lamps were on, and the door of the bathroom was open, with the lamp on too. At first, I imagined that my sister did it with me, because her bedroom is next to mine. But I think more, and I noticed that she wouldn't be so dumb to wake up and punch me while I was sleeping. After this strange thing happened, I didn't sleep all night. If someone could explain to me why the hell I felt a punch in my face, I would be so thankful with these people. Sorry if my story was short. I don't have so many details about it. Through elementary school and middle school, I lived in an apartment that was built in 1905, which also happened to once be a brothel. The apartments were located next to a retirement home. If you look at the outside of my old apartment, it appears to be a mansion, but on the inside there are separate units. There were many overdoses in these units. A lot of the tenants, if not all, were addicts. When I was around 10, I actually heard a murder occur my neighbour had choked out his roommate in the hallway of our apartments. Needless to say, there was a lot of negative energy there. One of the paranormal occurrences I remember is when my mom and I were home alone, and I heard the voice of my brother calling my name while she was in the shower. My sister happened to also live in a unit down the hall, so I went to see if my brother was there because I was so convinced I heard his voice. He wasn't there. Another time I had a headache. I was laying in bed, that happened to be in the living room, and in the kitchen the bread flew off the counter. And then seconds later a gravy packet also flicked off the counter as well. It was super scary. I know it must have been feeding off my energy. I also used to wake up at 3 a.m. sitting up against the headboard of my bed, which was unsettling every time. I used to feel watched 24/7. It was a fear I can't even describe. Anyways, since moving out over 8 years ago to this day, I have nightmares of moving back into the apartments all the time. Unfortunately, that's my most common dream. The apartment that scared the hell out of me as a child, that taunts me as an adult. I had recently asked my grandfather if he had any ghost stories, or stories of the like. One he told me was exceptionally creepy, at least to his standards. My papa was a painter, and one of the guys he worked with, who was certainly not the type at all to lie or anything, had told him and the other painters this once and then never again. The guy in question, Jim, was cycling home one night during the winter from his work. Jim lived in a very rural location, which was only really 30 minutes or so on a bike, away from the town where they all worked. His house was at the end of a 1 kilometer or so long road, leading up to his house and his house only. This road had a dirty stone dike at either side, running parallel all the way up. When cycling, it had gotten pretty dark. Dark enough to still be able to see the house, etc., sat way up ahead. While cycling up this road, he could see somebody walking towards him. He was confused. It was only really him that lived there at the time, and nobody lived nearby to be visiting. The man fast approached, and just as Jim got near, the man looked at him and walked straight through the dry stone dike at the side of the road. Jim began to understandably pedal like fuck to get to his house. Jim then gone to the police, and this guy he had seen matched the description perfectly of a man who had completely disappeared from that house 50 years prior and never been found. Creepy, certainly, and validated more so by Jim's no-nonsense nature. In those days, you wouldn't exactly tell stories like that to tradesmen. These are stories that in the 50s could potentially make you look like some sort of a crazy person. When I was a preteen, I never wanted to go anywhere with my parents. So they would go out for the day, and I'd stay at home. One morning, when this was the case, I was walking through the dining room in the kitchen to make my way to the bathroom. As always, I looked through the window on my left to see the enclosed back porch. This time was different though. When I looked left, I saw an older woman with a bonnet walking in the opposite direction of me. She appeared to be white with a bluish glow. She didn't stop, look at me, or speak. She just continued on the very small black porch. I didn't hesitate after my glance to the left. I quickly panned my gaze towards the bathroom as I always did. It only took a split second for my brain to process what I just saw. I quickly turned to the left again, still positioned by the window on the kitchen side, but saw nothing. There were only two ways into the back porch. One was the back door that was locked. It was a screen door and would get stuck, so everyone heard it when it was opened. And the door from the kitchen, which was locked since I was home alone and in case anyone ever tried breaking the screen door. When I finally came to terms with what happened, I immediately called my friend who lived a block away, and she stayed with me until my parents came home. We were a religious house and felt like they wouldn't understand what I saw, so I never mentioned it. The creepiest thing that has happened to me was when I was a freshman at Oak State. I wasn't fond of my roommates, and my close friend at the time didn't have a roommate in her dorm room. So I would go spend the night to escape my roommate and sleep on the empty bed in the room. Before doing that, she would call me or text me about hearing knocks on the walls. She lived on the 4th floor, and she was at the end of the hall. So she shared the west side wall with a neighbour. The north wall was where the entrance to the room was, east was wall to a stairwell, if that makes sense, and south was the window. Again, 4th floor. She would hear knocks on the east and south wall. At first I didn't think it was anything, probably just the pipes or someone pranking her. Another thing I'll preface is that we both had negative energy going on. She was depressed and I was depressed, to the point that we started to skip classes, sleep in a lot, and do anything but homework. One week into sleeping at her dorm, I finally heard the knocks. It was on the east stairwell wall. I ran out to see if it was a person and nothing. Came back in, heard it again, same wall. A few weeks later, we both heard it on the south wall, where the window was. As soon as I started sleeping there too, I would wake up and find myself sleeping. I sleep talk occasionally, but this was every night there. One time I woke up and screamed, and then she woke up scared, wondering what's up, and I had no recollection as to why I did that. I would also have half dreaming, half awake occurrences, where I would see shadows moving in the corner of the room. Super creepy for me. I've always seen weird things as a kid, but never really mentioned it to my family or friends. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I remember it all, it gets a bit concerning. When I was about 6 years old, our small neighbourhood would have parties in a popular bar nearby, where the buses would station. My mom would sell barbecue whenever these parties occurred. We were poor, and she did everything to keep us fed. This is in Brazil, by the way. As people were dancing and drinking and chatting, I was standing at the end of the space where it linked to two streets. I was standing on the corner, just waiting for my mom to finish selling her food. Suddenly, I felt something slimy hit my leg. I looked down and saw a piece of half-eaten corn. Confused, I looked back at the direction the corn came from and saw a black boy around my age, slanted behind a wall, peeking at me. He was completely black, had his eyes wide open and a huge grin on his face. I lived in the favela, so it wasn't uncommon to have shirtless black children running around, pulling pranks on people. So, being the hot-headed Aries that I am, I simply ran up to confront him. But as soon as I turned that corner, he simply disappeared. Mind you, he was about 8 feet away from me. Everything was closed and there was nowhere to go from where we were. I stood there looking around for about 5 minutes, then headed back to where I was, where I could see my mom working. I noticed the piece of half-eaten corn that was thrown at me was also gone. Back in 2003, I was 8 years old. Our family had just moved into a new country, and it was our first night in the apartment my stepfather had rented for us to live in. So due to jet lag and having already slept on the plane, I was wide awake. It was practically past midnight, and I was laying in my bed. For you to understand the story better, I'll have to explain what the room was like. So I had my bed at the end of the room below the windows, and on the other side was the door. Next to the door was a walk-in closet. Both doors of the closet had mirrors on them. They were pretty big. I'd say it covered 75% of the wall, so I could see my own reflection when I was on my bed. Anywho, as I laid there, waiting for me to fall asleep, I felt something grab my leg. Like a big hand violently grabbing my leg, then pulling me out of bed. As soon as this happened, I began screaming and held the headboard of the bed, so as not to get completely pulled away. As this was going on, I guess my brother was also awake because he heard my screams. He tried opening my door but couldn't get in. And in my house, there's a rule: never lock any door. So it was unlocked, but for some reason he couldn't open it. He yelled out to my mother and father. While they were getting up, I was still struggling and holding onto the headboard. When I looked back, I saw the reflection of myself on the closet doors. There was a huge black arm coming from under my bed, grabbing my leg and pulling me. As soon as I saw that, I screamed louder. When my parents finally reached the door to my room, they were able to open it. The hand let go and went under the bed. They turned on the lights and asked me what was going on. I told them what went down, but obviously it was swept aside as a bad dream, even though I was clearly awake. After that day, I grabbed the mattress and put it on the floor. I wasn't going to sleep on beds that had spaces under them, afraid of this to occur again. My brother believed me because I showed him the bed frame. There were 3 scratch marks on the side where the arm came out. Mind you, the bed was new. My dad had them set up the night we arrived. He knew I couldn't have done it. To my mom, they were like seeing someone real, just oddly dressed. No defumination, transparency, etc. She could literally have touched them, and she swears she probably would have felt them. Now to what I saw, one of the very few things. I don't have my mom's gift. As I have already prefaced with that, there was no difference if I say this is from the get-go. When I described the lady to my mom and stepdad, he told me it was the description of his grandma. And when he went to my grandma, his mom's house, he looked for a pic in one of them forgotten things boxes, and sure enough, it was her. I lived in the town I mentioned in that other post and met an old lady. I still remember her as if it was today. Short, was almost my height at 10 years old. Old style dressed old lady. Short curly hair. Even though she looked old, she had pepper hair and kind eyes. Chubby, a bit pale, but rosy cheeked, if you get my meaning. Beautiful smile and perfect teeth. She wore a white shirt with a ruffled neck. Not 1800s ruffles, toned down ones. And a wide cream-coloured dress with flower imprints and a cooking apron, blue. At the time, I didn't even think of it being weird that she always dressed the same. Never did I see her with other clothes. She would stop and talk to me, ask me how I was doing in school, how were my parents treating me. I was a mistreated child. How was my doggy, my only solace, and so on. One day, my mom asked me who I was talking to. I was just a few steps away from my home, was originally heading towards the Spaniard ruin to play with my friends, and I turned around and told her, with Maria. I don't recall the actual name, to be honest, and I haven't spoken to my parents in 10 plus years, so I'm not going to call to ask. She asked me, who is she? She and my parents are highly religious and believe in the afterlife, thus they believe in ghosts. What does she look like, son? I then got upset and told her, I'm not so fat that you cannot see her in front of me, Mom, and turned around to introduce her. She wasn't there anymore. My stepdad told me that the woman I described and name I gave was his great-grandma, who passed when he was around my age or a bit earlier. But he had very fond memories of her, and that she was very caring, loving, kind woman, and that as she did with a few stepchildren here and there, big family, she probably also took me into her family and was just looking after me, and that I shouldn't be scared if I saw her again, but that I should never follow her anywhere. I never saw her again after that, unfortunately. It felt like she said, we got caught, so this is it. So, ghosts are not Japanese-style horror cliches, they're like you and me, but they should have gone to another plane of existence, and we sometimes cannot see them as we other people. Actually, not sometimes, but most of the time. The first I can remember is in kindergarten. I dreamt of myself at school, lunch, picking my milk carton, picking pizza, then sitting down at the table and picking one pepperoni off the slice. It was a square cut with 2 pepperonis on it. Immediately following that, my friend next to me says, hey, you alright? This last part I didn't understand, but it's the only reason I gave the dream thought after waking up. So fast forward to real life, and that all happened. And picking the pepperoni off the pizza in real life is what connected everything in my mind. Apparently giving some sort of facial expression to the world. To which my friend then asked, hey, you alright? From then on, this has been a continual, but not continuous experience in my waking world. Another interesting time I had dreamt very specifically was sitting down in science class. It was experiment day, and starting to talk to my friend. I could tell in my dream that I was imagining tiny marching animated people to the left of his face while he was talking. It was very confusing. Later in the school year, a game, StarCraft, was released, and we played it incessantly. It ended up when this scenario played out in real life. The reason I was imagining the marchers, StarCraft Marines, was because we were talking about a game we played recently. I dreamt this one before StarCraft even existed to the public. Also, I've tried to change things at times. Once, having noticed I was in a reenactment, I tried changing my food order, because in the dream I'd ordered X from McDonald's and thought to change things by picking Y. Not only did it seem like she didn't hear me, she also correctly entered the order I didn't place in real life, the one I placed in the dream, and then read it back to me just like when I dreamt it. I've said flat out off-the-wall things to try to elicit a different reaction than foretold, and nothing happens. It's like my off-script words don't even exist. These people just go on responding in the same way as dreamt. Also, this is the most useless talent ever. I've never dreamt anything momentous, and I've never remembered a dream like that until the in-real-life situation happens. Well, the first one I remember waking up
and thinking my dream was weird, but not being able to put my finger exactly on it. After that, if I remember a dream, I can pretty much count on it just being a dream. Is there a way to hone this skill? Or is this just some useless anomaly in dreams that should be ignored? The coffin is pretty worn down now, since it's so old, but I think it still has its powers or negative energy, as some might say. There's not a single patch of grass around 1 metre away from the coffin, which is weird because the rest of the land seems to be pretty green. Also, a few years back, we community people decided to plant some trees on that land, since it was sitting waste, and to our surprise, all the trees that we planted died a few days later. We tried planting several times, but seems like no other tree grows on the land, besides the one which naturally germinate there, which is creepy again. Also, none of the stray animals nor birds enter that land. At least I've never seen any of the dogs or other animals enter the land in my life before. The scariest part is that my bedroom window faces that coffin, and many times I've heard strange and unexplained noises coming from that place. The noise is always like a rustling of the leaves, or like someone is moving around and doing something. I told this to my grandfather, and to my surprise, he hears them too. The spirit of that coffin didn't do anything bad to us in these many years, probably because our family never did anything harmful or damaging to the coffin. My dad kinda takes care of its maintenance, and he also lights up a candle at any time. There are so many incidents related to that coffin. Many of my neighbours have experienced creepy and bone-chilling incidents, which I'll further post here. This was just to give you the background. Also, do any of you live near such a creepy place? It's been a year and a half since me and two friends of mine moved into this apartment, away from our hometowns in a bigger city. We have free access to the whole house, but a room the owners use as storage space. We don't know what's in there. There used to be an old woman who lived here, and we rented it from her son and daughter. We jokingly said she was still here, but we don't joke that much anymore. At first, it was just noises and thumps, but after about 6 months, things have escalated a lot. Whatever this thing living with us is, it has started to mimic us. All of us. Whenever one of us isn't in the house, it takes its chance. Even if the person in question is sleeping, it mimics them. We've heard the others talk, laugh, shuffle through the house, and even say things in their own particular way. Things got lost. As much as I found my jacket in a backpack I'm sure I didn't put it into. My dog sometimes just stares intently at nothing, sometimes barks in empty rooms. Sometimes she gets up and asks for our attention. Then she tries to lead us to random points of the house. It's getting more and more elaborate and accurate at the things it says. And from the joke it was in the beginning, now we're starting to feel uneasy in our own house. Last night, my grandmother and I encountered a spirit. Now you may be wondering, what makes you think it's a spirit? Well, for starters, no other females besides my grandmother, mother and sisters live in my house. As it was late at night, everyone had already got ready to sleep. My uncle and father were outside for a little, but my uncle came in shortly after he and my dad finished taking out the trash. They locked the door, and my uncle went into his room while my dad went to the bathroom. Around 10 to 15 minutes after they came in, my grandmother, who sleeps in the living room, awoke to a woman in a turban, opening the door and walking towards the back of our house, without a care in the world. My grandmother, knowing she has kids living here and not knowing who this lady is, gets up and follows. As she follows, I seen the woman walk past. And not too long after my grandmother enters my room and asks if I'm okay. I tell her I'm fine, not really taking notice of what had just passed my room. She then goes on to other rooms and the lady is nowhere to be found. We spoke about it in the morning and talked about how it was weird that a completely random street cat entered my aunt's house the night before our encounter and attacked her. Then we encountered this thing. As I'm saying this, my mom is staging the house.